I'm wondering, have you ever talked to your houseplants? It feels a bit silly, but we might pat a leaf and say, "You're looking lovely today." But what if I told you that in their own quiet way, your plants might be listening? What if the humble plant on your windowsill is aware of its surroundings, learns from experience, and even remembers, all without a brain? Welcome back to Blossoming Brains, the podcast where we dig into the science that fuels lifelong learning. I'm your host, Dr. Vicki Draeger, and as a mother of 5 and with over 30 years of teaching experience, from curious preschoolers to dedicated master's students, I've always been fascinated by the different forms that learning can take. And today, we're venturing into the quiet, green world of our botanical cousins to ask a radical question. Do plants think? We'll be exploring the fascinating and certainly controversial field of plant neurobiology, which investigates evidence of plant intelligence, memory, and behavior. Today, we'll explore groundbreaking research that suggests plants can learn, remember, and make decisions, forcing us to reconsider the very definition of intelligence itself. For most of human history, we've seen plants as passive, almost robotic organisms. They're the backdrop of our lives, the scenery. We've thought of them as being genetically programmed to do just a few simple things: grow toward the light, shrink from the cold, eat through photosynthesis, and not much else. The idea that a plant could be intelligent seems like a categorical error, like asking a rock if it feels lonely. But a revolutionary, and in some circles highly controversial, field of science is challenging that view. It's called plant neurobiology. Now, that name itself is a bit of a lightning rod. Critics are quick to point out correctly that plants do not have neurons or brains, so to refer to plant neurobiology is very misleading. But the scientists in this field use the term as a powerful metaphor to capture a radical idea. They want to show that plants possess a complex and sophisticated information processing system that, in its own way, is somewhat analogous to the nervous systems of animals. Opponents say that plant neurobiology claims overinterpret ordinary physiological processes like iron fluxes, hormone transport, action potentials, and anthropomorphize plant behavior by using cognitive and neural language. Proponents, however, respond that even if the metaphors are provocative, focusing on plant behavior, electrophysiology, and comparative psychology has opened up neglected questions and methods, and therefore represents a legitimate, if fringe, research program. And I want to take a moment here and discuss that word fringe as it applies to science. Fringe science explores the boundaries of established fields, but typically lacks robust evidence, funding, or peer acceptance. It isn't the same as pseudoscience. Pseudoscience abandons all scientific rigor. An example of fringe science includes early chaos theory, which started as a kind of fringe or marginal area of science, but later became widely accepted and mainstream. I've learned that institutions like Cornell, which has a plant biology section, Yale, MCDB Plant Sciences, and the University of Illinois study plant development, stress responses, and molecular signaling, but they frame it as plant science, not plant neurobiology. Terms like plant neurobiology appear in fringe or controversial contexts outside mainstream academia, in most cases. However, the International Laboratory of Plant Neurobiology, which is generally just referred to as LINV, is located at the University of Florence in Italy. And it was founded in 2005 and led by Dr. Stefano Mancuso. This is the best known dedicated lab for this study. And Professor Mancuso is not any kind of a kook. He serves in the Department of Agriculture, Food, Environment, and Forestry at the University of Florence, and he's authored bestsellers like his books Brilliant Green and The Revolutionary Genius of Plants, which has been translated into 27 languages. He also delivered a TED Global talk, which has been viewed over almost 1.5 million times. So it's also worth noting that the LINV is generally considered a well-respected and distinctive research institution, especially within the niche of plant behavior and plant intelligence studies. It is part of the University of Florence, which itself is a long-established, reputable public university in Italy with strong life sciences and agricultural research profiles. The lab focuses on plant signaling, electrophysiology, and behavior, looking at how plants process information and respond to their environment in ways analogous to nervous system functions. LINV also has an affiliated branch in Japan where researchers study stress responses and light-related signaling in plants. So, with that background, I just want to say, at Blossoming Brains, we like to explore a variety of viewpoints, allowing our listeners to reach their own conclusions, and that's what we'll be doing today. To understand the viewpoint of plant neurobiology researchers, we need to let go of our brain-centric view of intelligence. For an animal like us, having a centralized command center, the brain, makes a lot of sense. It allows for rapid movement and complex behaviors. But for a plant, which has evolved to be eaten, having a single vital brain would be a fatal design flaw. One bite from a deer, horse, or cow and it's game over. So plants evolved a different strategy. Many scientists now believe that plants have a form of distributed intelligence. And if you've listened to my podcasts about the brains of an octopus, that's another example of distributed intelligence. So, distributed intelligence, think of it not like a single desktop computer where the processor is in one specific box, and more like the internet, a vast interconnected network where information is processed and stored everywhere at once. From the most delicate tip of a root to the edge of a sun-drenched leaf, the entire plant acts as a cohesive, information-gathering, and decision-making organism. This idea of thinking of a plant as having the ability to think might sound like something out of a fantasy novel. So let's move from theory to a stunning real-world example. It's the story of a plant that learned to stop being afraid. And it comes from the groundbreaking work of Dr. Monica Gagliano, a researcher at the University of Western Australia. The star of her experiment is called Mimosa pudica. You might know it as the sensitive plant, or touch-me-not. It's a small plant with delicate fern-like leaves, and it has a very peculiar behavior. When you touch it, or even gently shake it, its leaves dramatically fold inward in a matter of seconds. I know as a child I used to look for them, and I'd love to just touch them and watch them fold up. They're fairly common. It's a defense mechanism, this folding up, and it's meant to make the plant look smaller and less appealing to a potential herbivore. So Dr. Gagliano designed a clever experiment. She put a series of these mimosa plants in pots and built a special device that could drop them from a height of about 6 inches. Not enough to harm them, but certainly enough to trigger their defensive leaf curling response. She then dropped each plant once every 5 seconds for 60 consecutive drops. At first, as expected, the plants folded up tightly with every single drop. But then something remarkable happened. After just a few drops, some of the plants started to respond less dramatically. After a few more, they stopped folding their leaves altogether. It was as if they had realized, okay, this is happening, but it's not actually dangerous. They had learned that this specific stimulus was not a threat. In scientific terms, they had become habituated to it. Now, the immediate skeptical response is, well, maybe the plants were just tired. Folding and unfolding leaves costs energy, after all. Perhaps they were simply too exhausted to keep doing it. But Dr. Gagliano anticipated this. She took the plants that had stopped responding to the drops and put them on a shaker. The moment they were shaken, a new and different stimulus, they instantly folded their leaves up tight. This was the critical control. It proved the plants weren't exhausted. They had specifically learned that the dropping stimulus was irrelevant, while the shaking stimulus was still worth reacting to. But here is the most mind-bending part of the whole experiment. Dr. Gagliano let the plants rest for a full week and then tested them again. The plants that had learned to ignore the drop still ignored it. She tested them again after 2 weeks, and then again after 28 days. Even after almost a month, they still remembered their lesson. This is a remarkable feat of long-term memory, longer than has been demonstrated in some insects. So it would appear that plants can learn and remember. But the story doesn't stop there. They also seem to communicate, and they do it in ways that are just as sophisticated and complex as their memory. One of the most astonishing discoveries in recent decades is what some scientists have nicknamed the Wood Wide Web, not to be confused with the World Wide Web. It's a real-life, underground social network. Beneath our feet in a forest, the roots of individual trees are connected to one another by vast, intricate webs of mycorrhizal fungi. Think of it as a biological internet. Through this network, trees can communicate and cooperate. A large, healthy tree can send sugars and other vital nutrients through this fungal network to a smaller, struggling sapling that's shaded from the sun. They can share resources with their neighbors. But even more than that, they can send warning signals. If one tree is attacked by a pest or a disease, it can send chemical signals through the root network to its neighbors, who can then ramp up their own defenses before the threat even arrives. And if they can't talk through the soil, they'll talk through the air. When a plant is being eaten by a caterpillar, for example, it doesn't just suffer in silence. It releases a specific cocktail of airborne chemicals. Volatile organic compounds, or VOCs as they're called, it releases them into the air. It's a chemical scream for help. Other plants nearby can smell this warning. When they detect these specific VOCs, they begin producing their own defensive compounds to make their leaves less tasty, preparing for the impending attack. Some plants even release chemicals that act as a beacon for predatory insects, essentially calling in bodyguards to come and eat the pests that are attacking them. This communication is happening all around us all the time. It's a constant, silent, chemical conversation, a web of warnings, negotiations, and alliances that we are only just beginning to decipher. And there's some limited research showing that there are mother hub trees that communicate and support saplings that come from them than they do saplings that come from other trees, showing a preference for their own children. So this brings us back to our central question. Is all of this a form of intelligence? If a plant can learn, remember, communicate, and make decisions, are we not looking at a different kind of mind? This is where we truly connect to our theme here at Blossoming Brains, expanding our own understanding of what it means to learn and to know. Consider the simple act of a plant's roots growing through the soil. It's not a random process. The roots are actively foraging for water and nutrients, and they make remarkably complex decisions while doing so. Let's use one final analogy. Let's consider a smart shopper. Imagine you're the smart shopper in a grocery store. You go down an aisle and see it's fully stocked with everything you need. You'd likely spend a lot of time there carefully selecting your items. But if you turn down another aisle and see the shelves are nearly bare, you're not going to waste your time. You'll move on quickly. A plant's roots do the exact same thing. When a root tip encounters a rich pocket of nutrients in the soil, it will slow down and invest a huge amount of energy in branching out, creating a dense network of smaller roots to absorb as much of the bounty as possible. But if that same root tip encounters a patch of poor soil, it makes a calculated decision to conserve its energy. It will grow straight through quickly and with minimum branching, saving its resources for a more promising location. This is almost like a form of risk management and resource allocation that's fundamental to survival. It's like the plant is making a judgment call, weighing potential rewards against energy costs. It could be considered problem solving, and it's happening constantly without a single neuron firing. Because they don't have any neurons. So this isn't human intelligence, obviously. It's a decentralized, embodied, and ancient form of cognition perfectly adapted for a stationary life. It changes our deeply ingrained, brain-centric view of the world and invites us to see intelligence not as a single special thing that we possess, but as a spectrum of problem-solving abilities that life has evolved in countless beautiful and surprising forms. Now, let's expand on some of these ideas, digging deeper into the science and the philosophy behind what it means for plants to think or learn. It's one thing to say plants have behaviors that look intelligent, but what underlying mechanisms make this possible? What do scientists mean when they talk about plant neurobiology? And how do plants sense their environment without neurons or a brain? First, plants have a remarkable array of sensory capabilities. They can detect light, gravity, touch, temperature, humidity, chemicals in the soil, and even the presence of other plants nearby. They do this through specialized cells and molecular receptors that trigger biochemical cascades. Think of them as electrical and chemical signals that travel through the plant. These signals allow the plant to respond quickly and appropriately to changes in its environment. For example, plants use a hormone called auxin to grow toward light, a process called phototropism. This hormone redistributes itself within the plant to encourage cells on the shaded side of a stem or leaf to elongate faster, causing the plant to bend toward the light. This is a form of environmental sensing, leading to a directed response, and that's a fundamental aspect of what we generally call intelligence. But it gets even more fascinating. Recent research has shown that plants can generate electrical signals akin to the action potentials in animal neurons. These signals travel along the plant's vascular system and coordinate responses across different parts of the organism. So, when a leaf is damaged, electrical signals can travel to the rest of the plant to activate defense genes. It's a way plants rapidly share information internally, much like a nervous system, only it's slower and it uses different biochemical pathways. So this is what has led some scientists to propose that plants have a phytoneurological system, a network of cells that process information and coordinate responses. It's decentralized, spread throughout the plant body, and works through a combination of electrical, chemical, and hormonal signals. While not neurons, these systems perform similar functions, sensing, processing, and responding to information. Moreover, plants can exhibit what we call phenotypic plasticity, the ability to change their form and function in response to environmental conditions. This isn't just passive growth, it's an active, flexible response that requires the plant to integrate multiple sensory inputs and decide how best to adapt. A plant growing in a windy environment may develop thicker stems. One growing in nutrient-poor soil may invest more in root growth. These are strategic allocations of resources based on environmental assessment. All of this encourages us to rethink what it means to learn and remember. Learning in animals is often framed as changes in synaptic strength in the brain. But in plants, learning can be understood as changes in gene expression, hormone levels, and cellular signaling that alter behavior over time. For instance, that habituation that we saw in the mimosa experiment is a classic form of non-associative learning. The plant learns to ignore a repeated harmless stimulus. This is a basic form of memory that allows the plant to conserve energy and not overreact to irrelevant changes in its environment. Beyond habituation, there's evidence that plants can exhibit associative learning. This type of learning is where an organism links two stimuli together. Dr. Gagliano and colleagues conducted experiments where plants learned to associate a neural stimulus like a fan blowing air or a light source. And after training, the plants would grow in the direction of the fan alone, anticipating the light. This is comparable to Pavlov's famous dog salivating at the sound of a bell. It's almost a conditioned response. If confirmed and replicated widely, which hasn't been done yet, but if it's confirmed and replicated widely, these findings could further blur the line between plant and animal learning. But now what about memory duration? Plants don't have brains or synapses, so how can they store information for weeks, as in the mimosa study? Scientists suggest that changes in chromatin structure, the way DNA is packaged in the cell nucleus, can act as a form of molecular memory. Epigenetic modifications can turn genes on or off, and I will have a podcast later that will be entirely on the field of epigenetics. But epigenetic modifications can turn genes on or off in response to environmental cues and maintain these changes over time. So this allows plants to remember past events and adjust future responses accordingly. Let's consider how this might work in a natural setting. Imagine a plant that experiences a drought one season. Through epigenetic changes from the environment that make certain genes go on or off, it might remember the stress and alter its physiology to conserve water better in the future. These changes might even be passed to offspring, providing a form of inherited environmental memory. So all of this brings us to a broader perspective. Intelligence and learning have often been defined in a very narrow, anthropocentric way, centered on us, centered on brains, neurons, and rapid movement. But life on Earth is incredibly diverse, and intelligence has evolved many forms to fit many niches. The intelligence of a predator chasing prey is very different from the intelligence of a plant optimizing its growth over weeks and months. Plants teach us that intelligence can be slow, distributed, and embodied in chemical and electrical networks that span an entire organism. They remind us that problem solving doesn't have to look like human thinking to be real and meaningful. Now you might be wondering, how can this knowledge change the way we interact with plants and the environment? If plants are intelligent beings with memories and social networks, what ethical considerations emerge? Does this mean we shouldn't be trimming our hedges or cutting our lawn? I don't think so. But how might this influence agriculture, conservation, and our everyday relationships with the plant world? One practical implication is in agriculture. Understanding that plants communicate and learn suggests that monocultures, fields planted with a single crop species, might disrupt these natural networks and reduce plant health. Encouraging biodiversity and fostering healthy soil microbiomes could support the plant's own communication and defense systems and therefore reduce reliance on chemical pesticides and fertilizers, which often are not good for our health. Furthermore, our growing awareness of plants' abilities could inspire more compassionate and sustainable gardening and farming practices. Instead of seeing plants as mere resources, we might begin to respect them as living communities with their own forms of intelligence and social lives. On a philosophical level, recognizing plant intelligence challenges our place in the natural world. It invites us to move beyond human exceptionalism and appreciate the interconnected web of life. This can deepen our sense of stewardship and responsibility for the ecosystems we inherit. And on a more personal note, it might make you think twice before trimming that basil plant or repotting your fern. Perhaps a quiet conversation or a gentle touch is more than just a human projection. It could be a meaningful interaction between you and a fellow intelligent being. Before we wrap up, I want to share a few more fascinating examples that illustrate just how complex and surprising plants can be. Take one of my favorite plants, the Venus flytrap, for instance. I was always fascinated by that as a child. I couldn't believe there was a plant that would eat insects. This carnivorous plant catches insects with a rapid snap of its leaves. But it doesn't just close on any stimulus. The trap only snaps shut if two trigger hairs inside the leaf are touched within about 20 seconds of each other. This ensures the plant doesn't waste energy closing for false alarms, like raindrops or wind. It's a form of short-term memory and decision making are considered daughter vines, which seek out host plants to parasitize. I think that's how it's pronounced. They can smell chemical cues released by potential hosts and grow toward them, demonstrating remarkable sensory discrimination and directed growth. And then, of course, there's a sunflower, which famously tracks the sun's movement across the sky with its flower heads, a behavior called heliotropism. This tracking maximizes photosynthesis efficiency and shows an elegant synchronization with environmental cycles. All these examples highlight the diverse ways plants perceive, process, and respond to their world. And finally, let's touch on the concept of plant consciousness, a term that sparks intense debate. Consciousness typically involves subjective experience, awareness, or feelings. Can plants have these? Most scientists are cautious, pointing out that plants lack nervous systems and brains associated with consciousness in animals. And if you haven't seen my podcast on consciousness in humans, followed by a podcast on consciousness in other animals, primarily mammals, you might want to check those out. However, some philosophers and researchers are now arguing for a broader definition of consciousness that includes non-neural organisms. They propose that consciousness could be a fundamental property of life, manifesting in different forms across species. And again, this is discussed in the podcast that I did on human consciousness. So while this remains highly speculative, the study of plant intelligence opens doors to re-examining age-old questions about the nature of mind and awareness. It challenges us to expand our empathy beyond the animal kingdom to include the silent green world that surrounds us. Now, you might wonder, plants are intelligent in this way. Why didn't we notice it more? And why don't we notice it in daily life? Well, plants operate on a vastly different time scale than animals. Their responses are often slow and subtle, happening over minutes, hours, or days rather than milliseconds or seconds like they do in animals such as us. Plus, their language is chemical and electrical signals. They don't use sounds or movements that we can easily perceive. So imagine trying to understand a conversation in a language you've never heard spoken out loud. No wonder it feels like plants are silent and passive. In fact, some scientists argue that plants have a form of embodied cognition, meaning their bodies themselves process information in a way that complements any cellular signaling. For example, the way a vine wraps around a trellis isn't random. It's a purposeful search for support based on tactile feedback. It's an ongoing dialogue between the plant's cells and its environment, with the vine feeling its way as a blindfolded person might explore a room by touch. So beyond curiosity and science, understanding plant intelligence has profound implications for how we relate to the natural world. If plants are sentient beings in their own right, deserving of respect and ethical consideration, then practices like deforestation, monoculture farming, and habitat destruction take on a different moral weight. It challenges us to become more mindful stewards of the green life that sustains our planet. What's more, the study of plant intelligence can inspire new technologies. Biomimicry, the design of materials and systems modeled on biological entities, has already led to innovations like self-healing materials and energy-efficient architecture. Imagine designing robots or computers that emulate the decentralized adaptive intelligence of plants, capable of thriving in changing conditions without a central processor. This could revolutionize fields from agriculture to artificial intelligence. So today, here's your call to action. The next time you pass a tree or tend to your houseplant, try to imagine the world from its perspective. Picture the intricate chemical conversations happening beneath the bark, the subtle electrical pulses racing through vines of green, the silent decisions about when to grow, when to defend, and when to conserve energy. It's a hidden symphony of life playing out in slow motion, but with profound intelligence. In essence, plants invite us to broaden our definition of mind and intelligence. They remind us to consider the possibility that thinking doesn't require a brain. It requires connection, adaptation, and the ability to learn from experience. Whether it's the sensitive plant learning to ignore harmless drops like the mimosa, or it's the tree warning its neighbors of danger, or the Venus flytrap counting touches before snapping shut. Plants show us that intelligence comes in many forms, some quieter and slower than our own, but no less remarkable. And isn't that a beautiful thought? That the world around us is alive in ways we're only beginning to understand? That intelligence is woven into the very fabric of life, from the tiniest moss to the tallest oak? It's a reminder of our shared journey on this planet, interconnected and interdependent. When we see plants not just as passive background, but as active participants in life's grand dance, we open ourselves to a deeper appreciation of nature and perhaps even to new ways of thinking, learning, and growing ourselves. And to those of you who have read the accounts of Adam and Eve in Genesis, they started in a garden and they were told to be stewards of the plants and the animals. The field of plant neurobiology is still young and evolving. There are many skeptics and much to discover. But what is undeniable is that plants possess a farm of intelligence different from ours, yet profound and elegant in its own right. So the next time you pause to water your plants, speak to your garden, or walk through a forest, remember, you're in the presence of minds very different from yours, but no less fascinating. They have stories to tell, if we only listen with new ears and open hearts. Now, don't forget to share your stories and thoughts with us on our social media channels, and you can find references for today's podcast at vickidraeger.com. And now, until next week, thank you for joining me on this episode of Blossoming Brains, and don't forget to keep learning, keep growing, and keep blossoming. Thank you.